She was 6 years old. She was 40 steps from her mother, and she was surrounded by 43 adults within a 200-foot radius of the parking lot. We know this because investigators counted them afterward. Not 43 strangers in a city. 43 neighbors, coaches, parents, siblings, people who had been to this baseball field dozens of times, people who knew the names of the children running around their feet. 43 adults. And a 6-year-old girl walked out of their collective vision and never came back. That number should stop you. Not because those 43 people were negligent in any obvious way. Not because any of them acted with malice. But because that number exposes something about the way we construct safety and the way that construction fails at precisely the moment it is supposed to hold. We call ourselves a civilized society. We build institutions. We pass laws. We attend community events together. We tell ourselves that presence is protection. Morgan Nick's disappearance does not disprove civilization. It interrogates it. It asks whether the thing we call civilized behavior, the organized, structured, communal life we point to as evidence of our progress, actually produces the individual acts of attention and responsibility that genuine safety requires. The answer this case offers is complicated, and it is worth your time. If you are new to this channel, stay with me. What follows is not a summary of a tragedy. It is a forensic examination of how that tragedy became possible, why it took nearly 30 years for science to point a definitive finger, and what the gap between those two moments reveals about us, collectively, as the people who were supposed to be watching. Alma, Arkansas sits in the northwestern corner of the state, roughly 15 miles from the Oklahoma border. In 1995, the population was just under 4,000 people. It was the kind of town where the high school football schedule was a social calendar, where everyone knew which family owned which truck, and where the concept of a stranger was genuinely unusual. Most people who passed through were passing through on the interstate. The people who stopped stayed. June 9th, 1995, was a Thursday evening in early summer. School had been out for about a week. The Little League baseball fields near the Alma Community Building were busy the way they always were on a warm summer night. The kind of busy that feels festive rather than crowded. Blankets on the grass, coolers, the smell of concession stand hot dogs, children moving freely between groups of adults in the casual, semi-supervised way that was standard practice in small-town America in that decade. Colleen Nick had brought her daughter Morgan to watch her cousin play. Morgan was 6 years old. She had long blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile that appeared in every photograph. She was wearing a green Girl Scout t-shirt, white shorts, and white tennis shoes. According to the people who knew her, she was a quiet child, curious and watchful, the kind of 6-year-old who studied a group of children before deciding to join them. At some point during the game, Morgan asked her mother if she could catch lightning bugs with 2 other children near the edge of the field. Colleen said yes. This is the moment that has followed Colleen Nick for 30 years. Not because it was the wrong decision. Not because a reasonable parent in a community baseball field on a summer evening should have said no. But because of what happened next. And because of what that sequence of events revealed about the architecture of safety that she and everyone else in that field had trusted without examining. Morgan walked with the other 2 girls toward a cluster of parked vehicles. Near a red pickup truck with a white camper shell, a man spoke to them. The girls felt uneasy. They did not know why. Children are remarkably reliable, instinctual readers of social danger, a fact that developmental psychologists have documented extensively, even if they lack the vocabulary to articulate what they sensed. The girls left. They walked back toward the field. Morgan followed, but she tripped. And when the girls arrived back at the field and eventually looked back, Morgan was not behind them. She was not anywhere they could see. By the time Colleen began searching, which was minutes, not hours, the field was still full of adults. They spread out. They called her name. Parents stopped what they were doing. Coaches put down equipment bags. Within what witnesses described as 15 to 20 minutes, the understanding shifted from lost child to something worse. Morgan Chantel Nick was 6 years old. She was gone, and 43 adults, along with everyone else at that field that night, had been present while it happened. The investigation began that evening and moved quickly. Local law enforcement responded, the FBI was contacted within hours, and a search of the surrounding area started before midnight. Witnesses described the red pickup, older model, white camper shell. Some described a CB antenna. A composite sketch was developed based on descriptions from the two girls and from other witnesses who had noticed the truck in the parking lot. In 1995, there was no Amber Alert system in Arkansas. That infrastructure did not exist yet. The National Amber Alert program would not be formalized until 1997, following the abduction and murder of 9-year-old Amber Hagerman in Texas. A case with structural parallels to Morgan's that are difficult to contemplate without anger. The lesson of one child's death was not encoded into systems quickly enough to protect another. Flyers went up across Arkansas and beyond. The reward fund grew. The FBI coordinated with local agencies. Searchers combed the area, around the fields, the adjacent roads, the river bottoms south of Alma. Those river bottoms would become significant. The Arkansas river bottoms in that area are a landscape of dense brush, shallow waterways, and low-lying terrain that floods seasonally. In June 1995, the region had experienced elevated water levels. The bottoms were saturated, sections unreachable by foot. Investigators noted at the time that the flooding conditions would have affected both evidence preservation and search capacity. Some investigators working the case would later indicate that the river bottoms were considered a likely secondary location, meaning a place where a perpetrator familiar with the terrain might have moved quickly and quietly, with minimal risk of immediate detection. That geographical knowledge, the kind that belongs to someone local, someone who knew where the flooding made visibility and pursuit difficult, would become relevant to the profile investigators were building. In the weeks following Morgan's disappearance, thousands of tips were received. The FBI and Arkansas State Police processed leads across multiple states. At various points, investigators looked at individuals connected to a series of similar cases involving young girls in the region. One name kept surfacing: Billy Jack Lincks. Billy Jack Lincks was a resident of the area who had, by 1995, already accumulated a documented history of criminal behavior against children. He had a known record. He drove a red pickup truck with a white camper shell. That convergence placed him in investigators' field of view early. He was interviewed. He maintained his innocence. Without physical evidence connecting him to Morgan's disappearance, and without a body, the evidentiary threshold for charges was not met. Lincks died in prison in 2000, serving time on an unrelated conviction. For years, his death appeared to close a door. The primary person of interest in the Morgan Nick case was gone. The case had no body, no confirmed crime scene, limited forensic evidence from 1995. In the years that followed, the investigation continued as a cold case, with periodic reviews and occasional surges of activity around new leads. But the door was not as closed as it seemed, because in the years since 2000, forensic science had been quietly transforming what was possible. In 2019, investigators conducted a search of property associated with Lincks. In 2023, another search. Each of these was connected to the ongoing examination of the Morgan Nick case and the forensic record. And then came the detail that changed the evidentiary landscape entirely. A hair, found in Billy Jack Lincks' truck. DNA analysis linked that hair to Morgan Nick's family. Let that settle for a moment. A hair recovered from the vehicle of a man who drove a red pickup with a white camper shell, who lived in the area, who had a documented history of crimes against children, and whose truck had been noted in the vicinity of those baseball fields. That hair carried biological material consistent with Morgan Nick's family. This is not a conviction. Lincks died in 2000 and cannot be tried. But the evidentiary weight of that finding is significant, and it is the clearest forensic link that has ever been established in this case. Law enforcement, speaking carefully and correctly within the boundaries of an ongoing investigation, confirmed the DNA connection publicly. For the families, for Colleen, for everyone who spent 3 decades holding this case open, the science finally said something. If you are still with me, and I hope you are, type the word "still there" in the comments. Because that hair was there the whole time. The answer was always closer than anyone knew. We need to pause here and examine what the 30-year gap between the abduction and the DNA finding actually represents. Because it is not simply a story of technology catching up. It is a story of multiple systems, investigative, institutional, scientific, and social, operating imperfectly and in sequence. In 1995, forensic DNA analysis existed but was limited. The databases were smaller. The methodologies were less sensitive. A hair without a root, which is what many questioned hair samples are, could yield mitochondrial DNA but not nuclear DNA. And mitochondrial analysis traces maternal lineage, not a unique individual. The evidentiary bar for connecting a hair to a specific person was considerably higher than it is today. As technology advanced, so did the capacity to revisit evidence. Cold case units began reopening files with fresh eyes and new tools. The FBI's DNA database expanded. Commercial genealogical DNA databases, the same ones people used to find their great-grandparents, became available to law enforcement through legal channels and began resolving cases that had seemed permanently closed. This is the scientific dimension of the gap. It is real. It is important. But there is another dimension that is harder to discuss, and it sits in the investigative psychology. When Billy Jack Lincks died in 2000, there is evidence, suggested by the investigative record and by the patterns that cold case analysts observe repeatedly in similar situations, that his death, paradoxically, reduced the active intensity of the investigation. This is not a criticism of any individual investigator. It is an observation about a known cognitive phenomenon. When a primary suspect is removed from the equation by death, the psychological pressure to resolve the case diminishes. The accountability driver, the prospect of an arrest, a trial, a verdict, disappears. What remains is evidence preservation and periodic review, which is meaningful, but which operates at a lower urgency than an active investigation with a living suspect. This is not unique to the Morgan Nick case. It is a pattern documented across cold case literature. The death of a suspect functions as a kind of false resolution. It allows the case to become dormant without being closed, suspended in a state that is neither solved nor actively pursued. The Morgan Nick Foundation, which Colleen built, refused to allow that dormancy to become permanent. Her advocacy kept the case in public awareness, maintained pressure on institutions, and ensured that when new forensic opportunities emerged, there was infrastructure in place to act on them. That matters. That is the difference between a case that stays cold and a case that eventually produces answers. Let us go back to the field, because the forensic story, the DNA, the truck, the hair, answers who. It does not fully answer how. And the how is where the community psychology of this case lives, because it is where the broader failure is located. The man behavioral analysts have long focused on in connection with this case, based on the documented record, demonstrated a pattern consistent with what criminologists call situational opportunism. He was not a random predator who drove into Alma from elsewhere and took a chance. The evidence suggests, and this framing is important, it suggests, someone with local knowledge, with familiarity of the terrain, with an understanding of where a child could be taken and where pursuit would be difficult. The river bottoms, the flooding. Someone with intimate knowledge of that landscape understood its geography in a way that a stranger would not. The choice of location, if the analysis holds, was not accidental, but before location comes opportunity, and opportunity, in this case, was created by a crowd. Psychologists who study predatory behavior against children have identified consistently that experienced perpetrators choose public locations not despite the people present, but because of them. The dynamic that social psychologists call diffusion of responsibility The documented tendency for individuals to feel less personally obligated to act when they believe others are present and presumably watching is not merely an academic observation. It is a mechanism that predators learn to exploit, whether consciously or through the instinctive pattern recognition of repeated behavior. A crowded space tells the predator, "No single person here is actively responsible. Everyone is attending to their own child, their own conversation, their own evening. The field is full of people who are watching the game, and that is the exact condition under which a brief, 3-minute interaction near a parking lot passes without alarm." 2 children felt something was wrong and left. That instinct was correct. It was functioning. It was the right response. But no adult registered the significance of that interaction. No adult saw a grown man speaking to young children near a vehicle, noticed the children's discomfort, and intervened. Not because the adults were bad people, because they were operating exactly as most people operate in crowded, familiar, safe-feeling environments. They were deferring. Here is where the philosophical spine of this case demands we be honest with ourselves. We use the word civilized as a descriptor of achievement. We mean by it organized, lawful, structured. We build baseball fields with lighting. We create volunteer coaching programs. We organize community events so families can gather. All of those things are genuinely good. They represent real social investment, but they are infrastructure. Infrastructure is not vigilance. A society can be extraordinarily well organized and simultaneously blind to what happens within its organization. The baseball field in Alma in 1995 was not a dangerous place in any structural sense. It was exactly the kind of environment that communities build precisely so that families feel safe. The lights, the coaches, the shared familiar faces. But safety is not a property of a location. Safety is a product of individual attention. And individual attention is the one thing that diffusion of responsibility reliably dissolves. When we enter a crowded space and feel safe, we are not wrong to feel that way. Statistically, crowded spaces are safer than isolated ones. But statistical safety is not the same as individual vigilance. And the gap between those two things is where the most devastating exceptions occur. The bystander effect, first documented by social psychologists John Darley and Bib Latani, following the 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese in New York, itself a case where witnesses were present and no one called for help, does not describe cruelty. It describes the ordinary, well-documented failure of diffuse responsibility. Darley and Latani's research showed something uncomfortable. The more people present in a crisis, the lower the likelihood that any individual will act. Not because each individual person is less capable of action in groups, because each individual person assumes, at an instinctive level, that someone else will handle it. Someone else is watching. Someone else will say something. Someone else will step in. Morgan Nick's case is not the Genovese case. The adults at that field did not witness an abduction and fail to respond. They did not see a child in obvious danger and look away. The abduction was completed, by all accounts, in seconds. Probably in the moment Morgan tripped. Possibly faster than that. But the precondition for those seconds to be decisive, the social environment of distributed attention, was a product of that crowd. A crowd of genuinely good people who came to a baseball field to enjoy a summer evening with their children and who collectively created the exact conditions under which a child could disappear. That is not a condemnation of those people. It is a diagnosis of a system. The role Colleen Nick has played in the 30 years since that evening deserves sustained attention, because it is one of the most remarkable documented examples of grief transformed into systemic advocacy that this kind of case produces. Within months of Morgan's disappearance, Colleen had begun what would become the Morgan Nick Foundation. By the time the organization was fully operational, it had built programs that reached into schools, into law enforcement training, into legislative chambers. The foundation became a driving force in the expansion of child safety education across Arkansas and eventually nationally. It contributed to the strengthening of the Amber Alert infrastructure in the state. It developed programs that taught children age-appropriate safety concepts, what adults in your life should and should not ask of you, what to do when an interaction feels wrong, how to communicate with trusted adults about situations that seem off. That last element is significant, because the two girls who left the parking lot did exactly the right thing. Their instincts worked, but there was a gap between their instinct and the system, between what they felt and the adult response that should have followed. Child safety education addresses that gap. It teaches children not only to trust their instincts, but to communicate them immediately and loudly to adults who are empowered to act. It teaches adults to listen. More than that, it teaches the community that vigilance is not paranoia, that asking whose child is that is not rude, that moving toward an uncomfortable situation is not an overreaction. Colleen Nick built an institution that teaches people to close the gap. That is an extraordinary response to an unbearable loss, and it has measurable consequences. The foundation has assisted in the recovery of thousands of missing children. The programs it developed are in active use decades after they were created. None of that brings Morgan home, but it changes the calculation for every child who attends a baseball game, a school fair, a community event, every crowded space where diffuse responsibility could create opportunity. We should also examine a thread that has not been resolved and which complicates the picture of accountability even within the framework the DNA evidence now provides. Billy Jack Lincks had a son. His son is a convicted sex offender. Investigators and researchers following this case have, over the years, raised questions about whether Lincks acted alone and whether his son may have been present or involved in some capacity on the night of June 9, 1995. These questions exist in the space of documented interest rather than established fact. No charges have been filed against anyone in connection with Morgan's disappearance. The investigation remains legally open, but the question matters for several reasons. First, if a second individual was involved, the dynamics of the abduction change in ways that affect the behavioral analysis. Two people in a vehicle create a different profile of capability and risk than one. The speed with which a child can be taken, restrained, and moved increases significantly. Second, the possibility of multiple individuals would affect the nature of the collusion and silence that followed. If more than one person knew what happened, then the 30-year gap between the abduction and the DNA finding is not merely a technological delay. It includes the active maintenance of silence by people with knowledge. Third, this possibility, unresolved, undetermined, investigated, is part of what keeps the case technically open even now. The DNA connecting Lincks to the case is significant. It is not a complete accounting, and incomplete accountability is its own kind of failure, one that belongs to a different category than the community psychology of the field, but which intersects with it in a meaningful way. Because we are talking throughout this entire case about a web of proximity. The perpetrator was local. He knew the terrain. He knew the community. He possibly knew people who knew the families at that field. He operated within a social geography that should have made him visible, known, accountable. And yet, the community that should have functioned as a network of accountability, through the informal social monitoring that tight-knit communities rely on, either did not see the signs or saw them and did not speak. This is not an accusation. It is a pattern. Predators who operate within communities rely on that community's reluctance to disrupt social order. Accusations are uncomfortable. Suspicions are awkward. The social cost of naming a concern about a neighbor is real, and people feel it. And so the concern goes unnamed, and the opportunity persists. There is a body of psychological research that addresses this dynamic directly. It is called the courtesy bias, and in social environments, it produces a specific kind of silence. When something feels wrong but intervening would create social disruption, when pointing out the man near the parking lot would mean interrupting a conversation, drawing attention, possibly being wrong and embarrassed, the brain calculates the social cost of action against the social cost of inaction. In the absence of an obvious, immediate, unambiguous crisis, inaction almost always wins that calculation. This is not weakness. It is the way the human social brain manages the enormous complexity of group living. Most of the time, the calculation is correct. The man near the parking lot was just a man near a parking lot. Most of the time. But predatory behavior operates precisely in the space of ambiguity. It is designed to look like nothing. It occupies the territory just below the threshold of obviousness. A conversation near a truck. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that demands intervention. Until it does. And by then the moment has already passed. The solution, as Colleen Nick's Foundation and similar organizations have argued for 3 decades, is not to make people more paranoid. It is to lower the threshold. Not to assume crisis, but to check. To walk toward the uncertainty rather than away from it. To ask the question whose child is that out loud, without embarrassment, without needing to be certain first. To treat the brief social discomfort of an unnecessary check as categorically less important than the alternative. That is not a transformation of human nature. It is a shift in social norms. And social norms change. We know they change because they have changed, repeatedly, across history, in response to events exactly like this one. The Amber Alert system changed norms. Child fingerprinting programs changed norms. School safety education changed norms. The Morgan Nick Foundation contributed to all of those changes. But the underlying mechanism, the diffusion of responsibility that crowded spaces produce, does not change on its own. It has to be actively countered by deliberate individual choice. Someone has to decide that their attention belongs to the whole field, not just their corner of it. Let us return to the river bottoms, because geographically and psychologically, they matter to this analysis in a way that has not been fully examined publicly. The Arkansas river bottoms south of Alma are a specific kind of landscape. Dense vegetation, irregular terrain, waterways that shift with seasonal flooding. In June 1995, the bottoms were elevated, portions flooded, portions impassable to anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. The investigative theory, supported by the pattern of the search and the analysis of those who examined the case closely, is that those bottoms were used as an exit route. Someone who knew that terrain could move through it quickly and with minimal exposure. Someone unfamiliar with it could not. This is a detail that speaks to local knowledge in a specific way. It is not enough, on its own, to establish anything legally, but it is consistent with a profile of someone deeply embedded in the physical and social geography of that community. Someone for whom Alma was not just a location, but a landscape, a place whose hidden corridors were as familiar as its main roads. That embeddedness is part of what made this case difficult for 30 years. The investigation expanded outward, as investigations of this type often do, because the instinct is to look beyond, to assume the perpetrator was a stranger, someone who entered from outside the community's known world. But the evidence that has emerged points inward. The truck was familiar. The terrain was familiar. The timing, during a public event, in a window of collective distraction, suggests familiarity with the social rhythms of the community. This is one of the most reliably documented patterns in crimes against children. The perpetrator is more often than not someone within the social geography of the victim. Not always the immediate family, not always a known friend, but within the radius of the familiar. Communities struggle with this. It is harder to accept that danger comes from inside than from outside. Externally located danger is manageable. It comes from strangers. It can be addressed with stranger danger education. It lives at the edges. Internally located danger disrupts the social order entirely. It means the familiar face is not guaranteed to be a safe face. It means the man who lives nearby and knows the family is not automatically trustworthy. That disruption is psychologically destabilizing, and so communities manage it by defaulting to the external theory. The stranger, the outsider, the unknown. The investigative pivot away from Lincks, which occurred at some level when he died in 2000 without charges being filed, reflects, in part, this: community psychology. With Lincks gone, the internal origin of the danger became harder to hold on to, and the case drifted toward the cold file. It was DNA science, not community reckoning, that brought it back. The Amber Alert system is, in a real sense, one of the most direct legislative consequences of cases like Morgan Nick's. Arkansas implemented a statewide Amber Alert plan in 1999, 4 years after Morgan's disappearance. The national system was formalized in 2003 as part of the PROTECT Act. Today, Amber Alerts are standard across all 50 states and have been credited with recovering more than 1,000 children. Each of those recoveries represents a child who came home. The infrastructure was built in part because of what failed in 1995. This is the downstream effect of documented failure. When the cost is visible enough, systems change. Laws change, resources are allocated, protocols are developed. But here is the paradox that this case forces into view. The Amber Alert system is activated after an abduction is confirmed. It addresses the period after a child has been taken. It is a response system, and a remarkably effective one. What Morgan Nick's case points toward is the prior question. What prevents the abduction from being completed in the first place? Not the response. The prevention. And prevention in crowded public spaces is not a technology problem. It is not an infrastructure problem. It is a social norm problem. It is the question of whether the adults in a crowd understand that their collective presence creates individual responsibility rather than relieving them of it. No alert system addresses that. Only community does. Colleen Nick's Foundation has a specific program called the Child Safety Curriculum, which is delivered in schools across the region and has been adapted for various age groups and community contexts. At its core, the curriculum teaches something that sounds simple and is not. That personal safety is a shared project, that community is not passive, and that asking a question about a child's safety is never an imposition. The program teaches children what a safe adult looks like in terms of behavior, not appearance. It teaches them that they are allowed to say no, to leave, to be loud, to attract attention. It teaches adults that their awareness is not optional, that being present in a community space is not the same as being present for the children in it. This distinction between being physically present and being attentively present is at the heart of what this case documents. 43 adults were present at that field. How many were attentively present for the children who were not their own? The answer is unknowable. But the question is the right one. Because genuine civilization, not the organized, structured infrastructure kind, but the kind that produces safety for the most vulnerable, is produced by individuals who extend their circle of attention beyond their own immediate interest. It is produced by people who see a child they do not know and think, "Is that child okay?" It is produced by people who notice an adult near children and think, "Does that look right?" It is produced by people who accept the minor social cost of a question that might be unnecessary, because they understand that the cost of not asking is incalculable. A civilized society is not one that builds good institutions and expects the institutions to do the work. A civilized society is one made of individuals who act. Morgan Nick has been missing for more than 30 years. She was 6 years old. She was surrounded by people who would have protected her if they had known to look. The DNA evidence that emerged in recent years has placed responsibility at a door. It has not opened what was behind it fully. There are still questions. There are still gaps. There is still a child without a known resting place, and a family without a complete accounting. But science has moved this case closer to a form of truth than it has been at any point since June 9th, 1995. And in the space between that truth and the whole truth, Colleen Nick continues. The Foundation continues. The question of what happened in those seconds near the parking lot has not been answered in every dimension, but the pattern has been identified. The mechanism has been documented. The hair in the truck has been linked to Morgan's family, and the man who drove that truck died in a prison in 2000, having never answered for what the evidence increasingly suggests. That is not justice, but it is closer to truth than nothing. And truth in the absence of justice, is something. In 2023, when investigators conducted their most recent documented search of property connected to the Lincks investigation, they recovered materials sent for forensic analysis. Law enforcement has not disclosed the full scope of those findings publicly. The case remains open. An active investigation, in the technical sense, continues. What we know is this: a hair was found. The hair was analyzed. The DNA matched Morgan Nick's family. That finding was made public. What we do not know is whether that forensic link will ever be translated into a complete legal accounting. Lincks is dead. The question of his son's potential involvement has not been resolved publicly. The locations relevant to the case, including the river bottoms, have been searched with results that have not been fully disclosed. The evidentiary picture is incomplete. It may always be incomplete. That incompleteness is its own form of cost. It is borne primarily by Colleen Nick and Morgan's family, who have navigated 3 decades of uncertainty with a grace that defies easy description. But it is also borne, in a quieter way, by the community of Alma, by the people who attended that game and lived with the knowledge that something happened within their collective sight that they could not prevent and could not explain. People who grew up in Alma in the years after 1995 describe the change in the town's character in terms that are consistent across many accounts. The freedom that small-town American children had enjoyed, the unstructured, unsupervised movement through safe-feeling community space, contracted. Parents became more watchful. Children were given boundaries that had not existed before. The communal assumption of safety was replaced by something more cautious and more effortful. This is not a clean story of community trauma and healing. It is a story of permanent calibration. A small town permanently adjusting its internal social calculus because of what happened on one June evening. That adjustment is painful. It is also, in its way, the community paying a debt it did not consciously incur but collectively owes. The debt of attention. The debt of presence. Because the other girls came back, they did exactly what their instincts told them to do. They left. And in leaving, they came back to the adults who should have been watching. And those adults did not notice what the children already knew. There is a specific kind of horror that belongs to this case that does not attach to cases involving isolation or darkness or the failure of distant institutions. It is the horror of presence. It is the horror of an ordinary summer evening, of people who were there and doing everything right by the normal measures, and of a child who was not saved. That horror demands something of us, not guilt for those of us who were not there, not blame, distributed across people who were trying to do the right things and fell into a cognitive pattern so universal that it has been documented in psychology laboratories around the world. It demands attention. The specific, individual, unremarkable act of paying attention to the children in your proximity. Not just your own, all of them. The man near the parking lot, the child who seems uncertain, the interaction that looks almost normal but not quite. The question you almost do not ask because surely someone else will. Ask it. That is the lesson this case teaches. Ask it, not as a performance of vigilance, not as paranoia, as the basic, quiet, unremarkable act of noticing what is happening in the shared space around you and choosing not to defer. A crowd is not a guardian. You are. Morgan Nick would be 36 years old today. The foundation her mother built in her name has, by its own documented accounts, assisted in the recovery of thousands of missing children across 3 decades of operation. It has shaped legislation, developed curricula, trained educators, and maintained the kind of public presence that ensures the case cannot be filed and forgotten. The DNA finding represents the most significant forensic development since 1995. It does not close the case, but it places a specific name, a specific truck, a specific body of behavior into a relationship with what happened that can no longer be dismissed as speculation. Billy Jack Lincks, a man who lived in the community, who drove the truck, who had a history, who knew the terrain, whose vehicle contained biological material linked to Morgan Nick's family. A man who died in prison without ever being charged in connection with her disappearance. Whether full accountability ever comes, whether the questions about other individuals involved, about the river bottoms, about the forensic materials recovered in 2023, will lead to a final, complete accounting, is not known. What is known is that the mechanism that created the opportunity has been documented. The psychology is understood. The gap in communal vigilance that a predator exploited has been examined and named mechanisms can be countered. Named gaps can be closed. Named social patterns can be interrupted. That is the work, and it is ongoing. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote that ethics begins in the face of the other. In the encounter with another person, a vulnerability is presented that calls us to respond. Not with abstract principle, but with presence. With the simple act of being there and noticing. 43 adults were present at a baseball field in Alma, Arkansas on June 9th, 1995. None of them were monsters. None of them were indifferent. All of them came to that field with love for their families and pleasure in their community. And a child was taken from among them because the ethics of presence, the Levinasian obligation to see the vulnerability of the other and respond, was distributed so broadly across so many individuals that it effectively ceased to function. This is not ancient or exceptional. It is the ordinary condition of crowded public life. The question this case leaves us with is not who is guilty. The question this case leaves us with is who is responsible. And the answer, uncomfortable as it is that responsibility for the safety of children in shared spaces belongs to every individual who occupies those spaces. Not to the crowd, to you, to the person sitting in the lawn chair, to the coach packing the equipment bag, to whoever is nearest to the child who is walking alone toward the parking lot. Civilization, in the end, is not measured by the infrastructure we build. It is measured by the moments when an individual steps forward and says, "That child is my responsibility, even if she is not mine, especially if she is not mine." Morgan Nick deserved that moment. She is still waiting for all of what it owed her. If this case reached you, if it made you think differently about your own presence in the shared spaces you occupy, a school fair, a sporting event, a community gathering, then this channel has done what it set out to do. Every episode on Cold Case Redacted begins with a question that sounds impossible and ends with an answer that makes that impossibility entirely, uncomfortably explainable. That is the work. If you are here for the work, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and explore the other cases. The Sarah Ann Wood case, the Nicole Vandenherk case, the Kyle Collins case. Each one is built around a different failure, of individuals, of institutions, of communities, and each one leaves you with the same final question. What would it have taken to see it coming? The answer is almost never technical. It is almost always human. Stay with us. There is more to examine. Because the cases that most need examining are the ones where the failure looks, from the outside, like nothing at all.